Hi everybody, and welcome to today's session, Unpacking the NDIS Changes. My name is Ryan, and I'm the State Relationship Manager for Queensland. And I'm excited to be with you today on behalf of Plan Partners to help make sense of the recent NDIS updates and what they mean for participants, providers, and their support networks. I know change can often bring uncertainty, but our goal today is to bring some clarity, confidence, and context to what's new and how to best navigate it. Just to let you know that we are recording this session, and I've placed instructions for those who wish to add closed captions in the chat. If you haven't done so already, please turn off your camera and microphone until the Q&A at the end. Any questions you have can be asked in the chat for us to cover off at the end of the presentation. We'll also provide you with some useful links in the chat at the end of the presentation, and we'll follow up with an email with include a link to the presentation as well. I'd firstly like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I come to you from today, the Yagara and Turrbal peoples of Meanjin, and I pay my respects to elders, past and present. Here's a quick snapshot of what we'll be covering today. Section 33 changes to NDIS plans. What are they and why it matters? Enhancements to our dashboards. Enhancements to how we process service agreement, and updates to therapy funding, including new therapy claiming rules as a result of the latest price guide changes. We'll also allow time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to put your question in the chat box as we go. So what is Section 33? Section 33 of the NDIS Act outlines the requirements for what must be included in a participant's NDIS plan. Section 33 mandates that a participant's plan must include a statement of goals and aspirations, a statement of participant supports, how supports will be specified, and time limits for approving the statement. The most recent amendments to Section 33 came into effect on the 19th of May this year and introduced new concepts such as total funding amounts, funding components, and funding periods to the statement of participant supports. But what do these terms actually mean? Let's take a closer look. The total funding amount. This represents the total amount of funding allocated for all reasonable and necessary supports within the plan. Funding components. Supports that are grouped into funding components like core, capital, or capacity building with specific budgets allocated to each. And funding periods. Are fixed timeframes that determine when and how much of a participant's funding is available. In other words, a funding period is that time of part of the plan's funding becomes available and how long it needs to last. A participant can spend up to the amount of funding available in that time. Funding periods may also be referred to as funding drops, and these can be weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly. For example, a 12-month plan may have SIL funding drop weekly, and core funding may be divided into 4 quarterly funding periods. Each of these periods will include a date range and allocated amount. One to note though, amounts do not need to be spread equally across the period. So what does this mean for participants? These changes mean participants will see a more structured plan with clear budgeting and timelines for accessing their funding. We're also starting to see an increase in plan terms increasing from 1 year to anywhere up to 5 years. Overall, the changes to Section 33 are intended to make the NDIS planning process more transparent, easier to understand, and more effective in supporting participants to achieve their goals. With the introduction of funding periods, we have reviewed and updated how funding information is displayed on our participant and support coordinator dashboards. Our goal has been to retain the familiar experience as much as possible, while introducing a few enhancements to present the relevant information more clearly and simply. For any support coordinators on the call, you may well have participants on 3 different plans: Rota, PACE, and PACE with funding periods. With the latest enhancements to our dashboard, we've accommodated for all 3. The 4 key changes we have made to participants' dashboards to better align with Section 33 updates include improve participant and plan overview, increase transparency on the status of invoices, an overview of released funds, and a detailed breakdown of funding periods. Let's now look at these changes a little closer. The My Plan banner. This is a new banner which we've introduced and is the first thing you will now see at the top of a participant's dashboard, irrespective of plan type. The My Plan section gives you a complete overview of your plan details, the amount of funds managed by plan partners, how much the NDIS has released and is available for you to spend, and how many days you have left in your plan, as well as how many invoices are awaiting approval. As you scroll further down the page for the dashboard, under Funding Component Overview, you will get a handy visual snapshot of your funding and how you're tracking for each component or category in your plan. You have the option to view as a percentage or a dollar amount, and you can also click on the Core, Capital, or Capacity Building tabs to filter information to each of these categories. In this view, we will only show the released amount and not the total amount of funds. One of the key changes is the change in terminology used. For example, where we've previously used the term total amount, this has now been changed to released to better align with the terminology being used by the NDIA or consistency. In each support category overview, you can explore your funding for the current funding period for both the whole support category and for each individual support type. This includes how much has been released, how much you have spent, how much you have been reserved by service providers, and how much you have left to spend. You can also view a funding release summary for the current funding period. Here you can see the number of days until your next funds will be released, how much will be released, and the amount of funding periods for this support category in your NDIS plan. Under the funding period schedule, you can also get a breakdown of all funding periods for this support category. Again, important to note that funding periods and the amounts attached to them do not need to be equally spread. An example here is assistive technology. There may be a number of funding components for assistive technology, but most of the funds may be released in the first period. In summary, we appreciate that the introduction of funding components and funding periods has created an element of confusion. We've attempted to retain the familiar experiences of our dashboard as much as possible, while introducing a few enhancements to present the relevant information more clearly and simply. For support coordinators, this means you can find all the information you need for each of the participants you support in the My Plan section. And for participants, our navigation bar gives you quick and easy access to all your dashboard features, including an up-to-date snapshot of your budgets and spending for each of your core, capital, and capacity building supports. You may have also noticed that the previous slides that our dashboard makes mention of service agreements. A unique feature we have here at Plan Partners is our ability to reserve funds from a portion of participant support categories, as agreed upon between a participant and their service provider. This is done by a service agreement. This provides participants and their support providers certainty and clarity around what support will be delivered and the comfort knowing that funding exists to pay those supports. An example that I share with you. Participant may rely on a number of core supports. At the start of their plan, the participant identifies that from their core supports, assistance with daily living is their key priority. To ensure that that funding is protected for this support, the participant and their provider provide us with a copy of the signed service agreement they've entered into, and we subsequently reserve the funds for the support and show this on the participant and provider's dashboard. These funds are then therefore reserved for the stated period. The recent Section 33 changes have, however, changed how we show service agreements on a participant's dashboard and what information we now require to enable us to reserve those funds. Service agreements will now display separately for each funding period, helping clarify how funds are reserved over time. Additionally, statuses previously shown as inactive will now display as upcoming, making it easier to track what's ahead. Participants or their support coordinators can also release funds from upcoming and inactive service agreements, offering more control and flexibility in managing their supports. Any released funds will be returned to the amount available, allowing them to be reallocated to other supports as needed. These updates support our shift to funding periods, whilst also ensuring we can continue to service existing customers with older plans. They give you clearer information, enforce proper checks, and make it easier to reserve and track funds accurately. To enter in a service agreement on our system, we will now require the following: provider ABN, the participant's details including name and NDIS number, the service dates aligned with the specific funding periods and corresponding amounts, the amounts required for each support category, and the signed consent from an authorised party, be it the participant, nominee, guardian, or authorised support coordinator. And we also need to have displayed a clear breakdown of how the provider wishes for the funding to be split across the funding periods. I'd also like to highlight our provider dashboard. Key features of our provider dashboard are the ability to see a history of all your invoices processed with us and get detailed live statuses so you know when to expect payment. For any invoices that are on hold, your dashboard offers a helpful explanation of what's going on behind the scenes. You have the ability to create and submit invoices through our dashboard for those providers that currently do not use invoicing software. You can access participant details easily, including any service agreements you have with them that have been registered with us. Access remittances for payments processed with us, super handy for reconciling your accounts. And at any point while using your dashboard, you can submit an inquiry to our team via the inquiries link in the navigation bar. You also have easy access to our latest news articles and blogs via our Knowledge Centre. We've designed our provider dashboard with a focus on transparency and to limit the need for providers to engage support coordinators to follow up on the statuses of invoices. And that's our dashboard overview in a nutshell. Don't forget that you can access our dashboards via desktop, tablet, or mobile. And for anyone who would like a more tailored walkthrough of how to get the best use out of the dashboard, feel free to book in a demonstration with the local team in your state. I'll shortly share the key contacts later in this presentation. I'll now move on to discuss some of the key changes arising from the latest annual pricing review, with specific impacts to therapy supports. The three key changes are changes how you're now expected to claim for therapy supports, updates to therapy pricing, and travel claims for therapy supports. Additional changes that came into effect with the latest price guide specific to therapy supports are the removal of state-based pricing differences for physios and psychologists. These have now been replaced with a single national price capped at $183.99 and $232.99 per hour. However, it should be noted that remote and very remote pricing structures still apply. Price limits for dietitians and podiatrists also dropped by $5, now set at $188.99. The annual price guide also recommended therapy support prices be displayed in 10-minute increments. This is to encourage greater flexibility in session lengths and improve alignment between claim time and services delivered. It aims to clarify that 1 hour is not a default or expected service length. And I've demonstrated a quick example there on the screen around how the breakdown for an hourly rate of $193.99 could be best articulated and displayed. The third key change for therapy providers relates to provider travel claims, specifically limiting the total claimable amount to no more than 50% of the applicable therapy price limit on a pro rata basis. We're hearing lots of feedback on this one that this is quite confusing. So I've attempted to provide an example here of how that could be best displayed. As a starting point, in this example here, we've got a therapist's hourly rate is $193.99. Their travel time can be billed at a maximum of $97, that being 50% of the $193. If a therapist travels 20 minutes to a session, the travel charge would be $32.33. The calculation, therefore, being the $97 that we've previously identified, and then the 20 minutes divided by 60. A provider can also claim for mileage and other travel expenses like tolls if agreed upon with the participant and documented in the service agreement. When I send out the pack in the coming days, we will also include links to the NDIS site that provides further examples on travel claims. Also like to note that the time limit caps remain unchanged, that being 30 minutes each way in metro, 60 minutes each way in regional, and remote and very remote are not subject to travel caps. In addition to our dashboard updates, our online resource in the Price Guide Navigator and NDIS Budget Calculator have also been updated in line with the latest annual pricing review. We've also taken the opportunity to improve some of our behind-the-scenes processes in relation to how we handle and process invoices. No change to you and how you lodge, but as a result of the changes we've implemented, participants and providers will now have quicker visibility via the dashboard to invoices logged and their status. Previously, this could take a number of days to become visible on the dashboard, and we are now seeing same day. A shorter turnaround on average for invoices lodged, claimed and paid. We've done all this whilst improving our error checking and fraud detection. I'd also like to acknowledge that whilst we were making these updates, some of our turnaround times and response times fell below what you expected of us. For that, I'd like to apologise, but also thank you for your continued support. We certainly don't take it for granted. So in summary, we've updated our dashboard to improve highlight on participants, increase the awareness of invoice status and those awaiting approval, show a simple view of those funds that have been released, and provide a detailed breakdown of funding periods, as well as improved our fraud and error detection. If you'd like more information, or if you'd like our team to come walk through a more in-depth demonstration of our dashboard, please reach out to the relevant state manager in your state, and we'll connect you with one of our relationship managers. I'll pause on the screen for a short period so people can take down the details, but note I will also send out the pack with these details as well. Okay, so let's open to Q&A. Anybody has got any questions, feel free to raise.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi, how you doing?
We're just, it's Tasha, just getting quite a few questions just in regards to the travel. Just to repeat that again, can we just go over that again? Just in regard to the changes with the price guide. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So I think that the first point of call is to work out, firstly, what is the hourly rate applicable for your support? So in the example here that we've got a therapist whose hourly rate is $193.99. The new price guide changes state that they can only bill at a maximum of 50% of that. So that's the starting point. So we need to take 50% of their hourly rate to give us a starting point, which gives us $97. The guide then says that it needs to be prorated. So in this case, the therapist travels 20 minutes. So how do we get the prorated amount? So we take the 20-minute travel time divided by 60, which is the hour, and then you multiply it by the figure that we previously identified, which is the $97. Does that bring some clarity? Or
Yeah, I think that's good, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, when we send out the pack, We will also have a number of links of a number of other examples in there. I know we were limited in terms of our pack, in terms of providing examples, but when we send out the pack, we will include links to a number of other examples so we can see a different kind of spread.
Awesome.
So,
Ryan, we're also getting quite a few questions in the chat just in regards to when funding periods either have funding still left in a funding period and if that can roll over. We're also being asked just a few questions in regards to if an invoice covers 2 funding periods, but the funding's exhausted in the first funding period, what the provider would have to do in that instance. Did you want to go over that?
Yeah, certainly. I think that the easiest one is if there's multiple funding periods and the funds aren't used, all of the funds aren't used in, say, the first funding period. Those funds that remain available in the first funding period, they will roll over automatically into the second funding period. Okay, so that helps answer that one. In terms of where we see examples where services straddle funding periods, that our understanding is that if the first period is exhausted but there's still funds available in the second one, we should still be able to claim. That is the response that we've been provided. However, ultimately this is an approval for the agency.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Just having a look in the chat, Bella or Adam, is there any more trends?
Ryan, it's John. As a provider, is there a maximum amount claimage for them if you're doing community access?
In terms of travel?
Of mileage? Yes.
So are you talking? So you're therapy support, John?
No, I'm a service, so I'm just taking that for community access.
Yeah. So my understanding, there's no change. This only relates to therapy supports, John.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Adam and Bella, do we have any other trends or any questions?
I know, I was just trying to look. There's quite a few coming through as well. So you've covered the travel, and there was just a couple about the funding periods, or did you just answer that in regards to, I guess, the rollover of the funding and how that works when new funding periods are available?
Yeah.
So there's a little bit in there just in regards to if funding is exhausted. I think Ryan did cover it, but as a plan manager, we can only access the funds per plan period. So if funding has been exhausted, if you do receive a plan and you're not happy with the amount of funding that's been allocated, how it's been split between those periods, you would need to go back to the planner or to the NDIA. There's also just a quick question in there just in regards to service agreements. So our service agreements need to mirror the funding periods. So for instance, if it's $10,000 in a 1-year plan, the funding periods have been broken up into $2,500. You would have to have 4 lines showing how much you actually wanted to quarantine in each of those quarters so that we can replicate that into our system accordingly.
Hey guys. Oh, sorry, Ryan. It's Justine here, guys. We've actually got 3 people with their hands up patiently waiting to ask a question. So I don't know. Rosie has got her hand up. Rosie, did you want to ask your question?
Hi, thank you so much. I've got a couple of questions, actually. The first one being, as a provider, we're sending through schedules of supports. We've updated to include funding periods in ours now, but we are getting a lot of responses from a lot of plan managers stating that they can't reserve funds due to, I guess, the changes with the funding periods. Has this changed now for you guys? You're able to allocate funds within, say, that first funding period and so forth, or are you still unable to?
Great question.
Great question. So we did update. So as of last Friday, we should be able to receive them. I think the really critical point that Tash made earlier is that in the service agreement, that it needs to align with the funding periods, which we understand is can be quite tricky, because I think part of the challenge too in relation to the funding periods and funding components, plan managers cannot release that information to a provider without prior consent from the participant. So we have received a number of inquiries in the last week from providers asking us to be able to articulate to them what does the participant's funding component and funding periods look like so they can adjust their service agreements. Unfortunately, if we don't have the participant's prior consent, we cannot release that information. So what that means is effectively the provider needs to obtain that information from the provider, from the participant, I should say, up front, so that then you can then adjust your service agreements in line with those funding periods and funding components.
I guess just to follow up that, and then, sorry, I do have one more question after this. Do you need the schedule resent to you at the commencement of each new funding period, or is it sufficient to send you the schedule of support at the beginning of the plan, and then you guys can allocate automatically when the new funding periods commence?
Yeah. So if you've got in the service agreement, so, and I'll use the example, if you've got if the participant has a 12-month plan, you enter into a 12-month agreement, and there's 4 quarterly funding components or funding periods. If within your service agreement you've broken down to which supports and services you're delivering, how much you're delivering in each of those funding periods, we can adjust and reserve the funding for you on that basis.
Awesome. Hopefully future other plan managers can adopt this soon too.
I was going to say, I just wanted to add on to that. At the moment, us being able to allocate and do service agreements, not every plan manager can. For us, it is a really great benefit that we can and have been able to introduce it for the funding periods as well. So yeah, just wanted to add that point in as well.
Thank you. And then I'll be super quick so other people can ask questions. The one thing I did want to clarify is just that the topic of, say, one invoice being sent that carries across 2 funding periods. I've gotten a different answer in the chat than you just gave. So could you please clarify? In the chat, it said that if let's say the funding period goes until the 30th of June, recommences on the 1st of July, we've run out of funding in funding period 1 on the 30th of June, but we have a service we provided on that date. And then we also have a service we've provided on the 1st of July. In the chat, it said that invoice would be rejected because there's insufficient funds, whereas you said you should be able to claim because the new funding period has had its budget allocated. Can you just clarify what it actually might be?
Yeah, that was me. So we're unable to part pay invoices. So if the funding had been exhausted, if it was one invoice covering 2 payment periods and it was actually daily, if there was it was very clear what dates it was provided and there was some funding in the previous period and also in the new period, then that would be absolutely fine. If the funding is actually exhausted in the last period and the invoice is covering both of those, it would be rejected because we can't part pay an invoice. Correct me if I'm wrong, team, but that's still my understanding.
So yeah, I think funding period from the 1st of July onwards could cover the 30th of June?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So the whole, and this is actually coming up in the chat a little bit, so it's probably a good time to mention it. The whole reason that the NDIS and NDIA have implemented funding periods is to stop overspend. So you cannot submit an invoice from, say, the 30th of June. If that funding period was exhausted, then on the 1st of July, it would be rejected.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I think, Tash, you make a really good point there too. I think one of the examples that we do see from time to time as well, and it's not often, but we do see it. We see providers send us an invoice once or twice a year, and for services delivered in that sort of prior 6-month or 12-month period. If we've got providers that are doing that, they do run the risk of having that invoice getting rejected, because if there's any funding periods and the funding has been exhausted for those prior periods, that will get rejected. So I think best practice is that the sooner you can get your invoice in for the services you provided, the better that you will be in terms of getting that being able to get claimed.
We can probably just provide more clarity in our follow-up email as well, because I think people in the chat are still asking for some further clarification, so we can certainly provide that. Lorraine Sullivan, I think, might have a question.
Yeah, so I did put it in the chat and it wasn't responded to, but my concern is that as a service provider, I'm not always given information about funding and plans and how that's been allocated. So is the onus on the support coordinator and or the participant themselves to advise what funding is available? Because if I don't have access to it, I can't know that there's going to be funding for me to provide my service. And I don't think it's fair for providers to be refused payment based on a lack of information, a lack of opacity of and clarity, of what's going on in plans.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Lorraine, and I think that I don't think there's any real natural guidance on this one, but from me, I think it would be the more and the closer relationship you can have with the support coordinator and the participant to better get visibility around what's in the plan and any visibility to any funding periods and funding components. I think that's all you can do to best avail yourself of that.
Yeah, just in addition to that, Lorraine.
If you don't have a relationship, if you're being newly brought on board as a provider, then you have very little sway into what information you're given. You're given what you're given. And I feel like, and I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like providers are kind of being strung out on a line and we're being made to carry all of the responsibility around the funding and payments when you're saying that we can be providing a service in good faith and not getting paid for it.
I think this is where the service agreements are really, really important for you, Lorraine. If you can actually complete the service agreement with the funding that is going to be required in those funding periods, and the support coordinator or the participant would be able to tell you what those funding periods are. And then that is a direct discussion with the participant and the support coordinator. And then your service agreement would be signed. So if that participant was with us, you would then be able to email us a copy of that service agreement and we can quarantine those funds away.
But you're also saying that doesn't guarantee that it's going to get paid, because I do have service agreements, for instance, and I would say most providers, if not all, do have service agreements with their clients. But if they don't tell me what funding's available and the funding then doesn't end up being available, my service agreement doesn't really mean anything, because you're still going to you're going to refuse the payment. I'm just concerned that there's going to be a lot of people doing a lot of work that they're not going to get paid for because the funding's not available and people aren't being open about it, because there's no obligation on the part of the participant to provide me information of their funding to ensure that I know that the funding is there.
I think that's the age-old issue, though, isn't it? Yeah. That that's where providers have always found themselves in a sticky situation when they haven't been made aware of the plan and what's in the plan and what's still available to use within the plan. So ultimately, it's a business decision as to whether you will provide service to that participant if they're not going to be transparent about how much funding's in their plan. And it's not a new issue for providers to have to grapple, unfortunately. I think I don't know who admin has got their hand up next, but I don't know who admin is. Or we can move on to Tanya Pollard.
We'll go to Tanya.
On mute.
Is it? I don't know. I tried to put my entry my name under name Priya. I don't know. I'm still showing up as admin here.
Oh, that's all right.
Hi guys, thank you so much for the webinar. Actually, that was very excellent. I have I have experience from my past as a support worker. What happened? I've been work with one of the client through the a platform. It's called Mabel. And what happened? They use my services. I work with them 8 hours, 6 days a row, and I keep putting up my pay slips, putting the invoices there, and they did not approved it. And later on, like after having struggle with the all, and they come around, they say, sorry, we don't have that much funding. And I I have nowhere to go. Sadly, I just stepped back and I lost my all the hard work and hours I put in with the participant. I didn't get anything. So this is a reason I'm very concerned. Like what happened is what we can do in these cases if they use the services from the support worker and later they say sorry we don't have funding. Then what we will do?
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I think that goes back to a point that Justine raised earlier. I think the challenge is that becomes an issue between yourself and the participant, unfortunately. And obviously the plan manager doesn't have a role to play, unfortunately, in this one. And based on the examples that we've seen as well, the guidance that the agency will also give providers is that it's an issue between yourself and the participant. So however you can best come to an agreement to get those services paid for. Yeah.
Would you need to do a manual claim through NDIA if you're not being paid?
I was like I was a Mabel. They were NDIS participant.
Yeah, but what you can do if the client runs out of funding, you can do a manual claim through the NDIA to receive your payment.
Oh, okay. Manual plan with the NDIA.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank
There's
you.
a couple of conditions attached to the ability to be able to do that. I mean, you can always try, but for manual claims, the way that we understand a manual claim to be, they can only be submitted once a plan's at its end. So you might be holding, especially with 5-year plans these days, you might be holding on to that debt for quite some while. I think that your issue might well be first point of call is with Mabel. Have a conversation with them, have a conversation with the participant, and see if there's any way that you can find a resolution to your problem. I'm really sorry that you're in that situation. We've got Tanya Pollock with a question.
You're just on
mute. You're
mute,
on mute, Tanya.
But while Tanya does take herself on mute, there is a lot of questions popping up about just the different funding periods. So I think we will address those. We'll put some examples in our communication that we're going to send out after today's sessions that will probably explain it in a little bit more detail.
Sorry, hello. My question is around the wording in the plan, mostly under the capacity building therapy type budget. As a support coordinator, we try to attend as many meetings as we can when the plan review comes up and get the wording to be put in there pretty flexibly. But if it is not in there saying, it might specifically say this is to be used for speech for 10 hours and OT for 10 hours, can we still access a physio under the CB funding, or will it just be rejected because the word physio is not in the wording?
I think it depends on what day of the week it is.
Yeah.
I think I think what Justine's saying, I think that there was a really great example of this on our previous webinar with the DIA, where they provided 3 examples where this can be quite conflicting, where you could effectively have those supports 100% stated in terms of which supports are stated and the number of hours for those supports. So they're fully stated. There's no ambiguity. There's no workaround. They also shared examples where it can be semi-stated. So you may have a particular support in there, but flexibly being able to use across other ones, and you could have it just being flexible. So I think that it depends on the actual wording on that. So I don't think it's as clear cut as what everybody would like it to be and what it was intended to be in terms of being fully stated. So based on those examples that we're seeing.
Okay, so as long as it says something along the lines of, speech 10 hours, OT 10 hours, this can be used flexibly, that would be okay. But if it says stated, that would just be specifically for those things.
Yeah,
I think it depends on your plan manager as well. I'd be having a conversation with your plan manager because every plan manager probably has a different skew on how they process those invoices under the way that the plans are written. So we invite you to contact us for any of your participants that you might have with us, because we might have a completely different way of interpreting that plan and how to use it as another plan manager might.
Yeah, Thank you.
Melissa. On mute.
Sorry, it's just come up a couple of times in the chat now, just in regards to what happens with support coordination hours when there's a crisis. So I think the main thing with crisis and if funding's actually closing out, you do need to go back to the actual NDIA to do a plan review. As a plan manager, we can't access any additional funding to what's already been stated in the plan. With the funding periods, we can't access funding from one funding period to another either. We might just take one more question from Melissa.
Lovely. Thank you. Allied health practices. When having a service agreement with an occupational therapist out in the field, we understand the 50% discount. What if there's a cancel? Be able to still bill for that, for the travel, even though it hasn't been attended to, but it's still the practitioner's time that's actually been allocated for the travel.
Yeah, great
We've
question,
definitely
Melissa.
seen cancellation invoices come through for the travel component as well.
Thank you.
If everybody, there's quite a lot of hands up. If you want to quickly type your question into the chat and we can take all of those questions offline. Tasha, Ryan, are we beginning to wrap up?
Yep, we're about to wrap up. So just in terms of next steps, so that does conclude today's webinar. I'd really like to thank everybody who joined and for those who participated in the Q&A session. For those who are interested in attending any future webinars or events, please subscribe to Plan Partners via Eventbrite. In the coming days, we will be sending out a copy of this pack, as well as responses to any questions we're unable to answer, as well as some of the key questions that we didn't get to or that require further investigation. For those participants and providers who reside in Victoria, our Victorian team are currently doing a roadshow across the state. If you'd like further details, again, check Eventbrite. So thank you for that. I hope you have a great day and we'll be in touch shortly. Thank you.